My youngest daughter, Jillian, she prepares great meals in advance on a decided cooking day, and then she freezes them. But she takes this up a notch. She'll make, instead of just making like one meal for her family, she'll do it 7 times over. Okay, so she just multiplies whatever she's making times 7. Now, that would be cool enough, right? But then what she does is she invites 6 friends who are also doing the same thing, and then they get together and they exchange frozen meals. And so then they have food ready to go, and they swap meals. You might say, what in the world does that have to do with our passage today? Well, today we learn that Jesus has ready to serve in mind too. But it's not food that he's talking about. It's his followers. You and me, we are supposed to be ready to serve. Let's take our Bibles and take a look at Luke chapter 12. And I'm just going to read it out for you, verses 35 to 40. You follow along with me. This is Jesus speaking. Be dressed, ready for service, and keep your lamps burning, like servants waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will dress himself to serve, will have them recline at the table, and will come and wait on them. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them ready, even if he comes in the middle of the night or toward daybreak. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. So you must also be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Now, there's some key words in this passage that I would like, in a few minutes that we have, just to bring to your attention that I hope will kind of soak in over the course of this next week. And with some help from Marcy this week as she was preparing the bulletin, we put these key words into the form of a cross. Kind of significant. You'll see why here in a moment. So let's start with the very top of the cross. Be ready. The key word is ready. And we see it 3 different times. You can't miss it, right? The very beginning, be dressed ready for service. And then right in the very middle, for those servants whose master finds them ready. And then at the very end of the passage, you must also be ready. Do you think that Jesus is trying to get an idea across to you? Do you think this is a key word? You know, this is not something that we can decide at the last minute to be ready. We have to decide ahead of time. It must be an attitude of how we live our lives. Every day, if we are Christians, we say to ourselves 2 things. Number 1, today Jesus could return. Today could be that day. And then the second thing that we should also say, that we should actually ask ourselves, right on the heels of that first thing, is, am I ready for him to return? Am I living my life in a way that would please him? If he physically walked into the room where I'm at, if he physically walked into my life right now, would I be ready? That's what Jesus is talking about here. This is not just something that we say, it's a way of life. We are to be ready for our master's return. And that leads us, by the way, to the cross beam. This idea of master. 3 words that we see over and over again, 8 times. 8 times in this passage. How could you even miss it? Service, servants, and master. Boy, it's rich in this passage. Service, servants, and master. We cannot read this passage without grasping the basic concept of service, of serving, that we are the servants, that Jesus is the master. And this simple truth will profoundly change our lives, both the direction of our life and the joy that provides to us. Our direction will change because when we realize that we are the servants and not the masters, then our task becomes so much easier because our task becomes one that our master gives us to fulfill. You say, well, what task is that, Pastor Mark? Read all about it in the Bible. Right? You want to know what task God has in mind for me? How can you know? Without reading. Because God says, I give you everything that you need to know right here. All the commands, all the instructions, all the ways that you should be living. So if you're not into the Word of God, if you're not reading this on a regular basis, how could you be expected to know what it is that your master wants of you? So not only the direction, but also our joy will change because now we know that we were created originally. Our purpose is to serve Christ. It's what we were made to do. And when we figure out that, this is who we are, that we're servants, that Jesus is the master, we're here to serve him, and we figure out what it is that we're supposed to do, we figure out who we are and how we're supposed to serve, we figure out what, God how he has uniquely created each one of us, the things that we can do that other people can't do and that God calls on us to do. I mean, watching Tamara today, I'm sure that many of you said, wow, that is so awesome. It is so awesome. And I will just be the very first to say to you, I could not do what Tamara does, right? And many of you would say the same thing, and that's okay, because God's not asking me to do what Tamara does. He's not asking you either. He's saying, I have made you, child, unique, with unique abilities, with unique interests, with unique talents, with unique history, with unique background, with all the things that's happened in your life. I have created you to be able to do something unique for my kingdom. So my job and your job is to find out what that is and then to go about doing it. And when we find that out and when we go about doing it, our life is filled with joy. And your life will be filled with joy too. We are not the masters. We cannot control everything. I don't know about you, but when I try to control things, I get frustrated. And I find that I'm really not in control. Our plans, as much as we make them, our plans go bad. You've heard this. You make plans and God laughs at your plans. He laughs at my plans. Our attempts sometimes to serve ourselves by planning for ourselves leaves us all the time just wanting, but never satisfied. So, the top of the cross is ready. The cross beam is service, servants, and master. And when we realize who the master is and who the servants are, that we're not the master, that he is, and that we're the servants serving him, then we come to the center of the cross. And that word, one time, is keep. Keep. Center of the cross. Verse 35. Keep your lamps burning. Now, I grant you that this one key word is really easy to miss. It's not only a key word in this scripture, it's a key concept to the Christian life. How else can I say it to you? Keep on keeping on, right? Keep going. Don't quit. Don't tire of living this servant life as a Christ follower. Don't get bored with it. Don't get distracted away from it. Don't become engrossed in anything else that takes you away from the Christian life. Consistency. That's what we're talking about here. Keeping on. Consistency. It's not fancy. It's not thrilling. It may not be inspiring. Just doing every single day what you know God has called you to do. There's another word for this. It's called faithfulness. Just being faithful. It's the center of the cross, and it's the center of our Christian life. And then we come to the foot of the cross, the word they. And you may not have noticed this pronoun in there as much, but let me kind of help point it out to you because it's there over and over again. They or them in this passage 5 different times. And then every single time, you might not see this, but every single time you see the word you or your, which is in there multiple times as well, every single time in the original language, that word is plural. So where I come from, where my family comes from, West Virginia, the translation would be you all. You all. That's how it would be translated, okay? This one is tough for us because of our culture. As Americans, we tend to be individualists. When we read our Bibles, we tend to look at every single thing that we're reading as being directed to us individually. And so we say, well, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I answering? I'm only responsible for myself. I'm only responsible for my behavior. My faith is my own. We use these words, my decision to follow Christ. My choice to go to church or not to go to church. But what we see here, and this, again, might be shocking, but we see that this is not the Christianity that Jesus is talking about. This is not the kind of community faith that Jesus is giving to his disciples. See, this passage is addressed to us and not to me and not to you by yourself. It's addressed to all of us. Servants, in every single case in this passage, servants in every case is plural, not individual. Each one of you and your is plural in every single case. They and them is plural. You see, we live out this command to be ready. We live out this command to serve. We live out this command to keep on keeping on together, not just by ourselves. And so if you're trying to do everything that we just talked about before, keeping on and serving and being consistent and being faithful, and you're trying it on your own by yourself and you find yourself failing over and over again, well, there's why. Because God never created you to do this by yourself. And I just got to tell you, some of our personalities really struggle with this, right? Because some of us are just, where's the party? That's where I'm at. And some of us are, getting me out the house is tough, right? I just rather be by myself all the time. But God says, no matter what kind of personality you have, we are to live out this faith together. And that when we attempt to live out the instructions and the ethics of our Christian life individually, by ourselves, without the help of others around us, we will always fail. We do this together or not at all. That's why, by the way, that church is so important. We are not Lone Ranger Christians. This is not my idea because I'm your pastor. This is Jesus' idea. This is how he is telling you right here, right now, to be ready. You are ready together. And it's the feet of the cross because we carry our faith. We carry our needs. We carry both our failures as well as our successes to one another when we come here to church. And our togetherness literally is the feet of our faith. And then last, we come to one last key word. It is the foundation of the cross. It would be literally what holds the cross up. And you see this key word, it's watching in verse 37. This foundational word brings this entire passage together. We are not just Christians, we are to be watching Christians. Now, this word is fascinating. Some of you just have to learn to be fascinated by words like I am, but let me just lead you down a little path here about how fascinating this word watching is. First of all, this word watching, we're to be watching Christians, right? Watching is not surprising, it's a verb, right? To watch is a verb. That means watching is an active thing. It's an activity. It's something that I am doing. But this is not just a verb, it is a present tense verb. That means I am to be watching now. Wait a minute, that was then. I am to be watching now. Wait a minute, that was then. I am to be watching now. In other words, every moment, I am to be watching, anticipating Jesus' return. And for some of us, how difficult this is because we haven't thought about Jesus returning in quite some time. But Jesus says you are to be watching every moment of every day. And since it's been 2,000 years since he said it, we think, well, it might be another 2,000 years. No, it's now. It's a present tense activity for every Christ follower to be watching for Jesus' return now. So how am I watching now? Yesterday's Christians' proclamations, sometimes we rest on what we said we were committed to yesterday. Maybe you signed a card, or maybe you knelt at an altar, or maybe you got baptized at some point, and that was kind of like the highlight of your spiritual life. But that's yesterday. Jesus says that you're to be watching now, that every moment of your spiritual life is a now moment. Yesterday's Christian proclamations, or even tomorrow's Christian intents, is not as important as today's Christian watching. So it's a verb. Not only is it a verb, it's a present tense verb. And not only is it a present tense verb, but it's also an active present tense verb. So what do you mean active? Well, in the Greek language, they had things that were active and they had things that were passive. Passive was things that happened to me. Active was things that I actively did. Okay? So this is active. This isn't passive. So, well, what does that mean? It means that you cannot live off of somebody else's Christianity. You cannot say that, my family is Christian, or I am in a Christian nation, or, my parents were Christian, or my kids are Christian. No, it is I am living a Christian life, or I am not. We are living a Christian life together, or we are not. Do you see the difference? So it's an active present tense verb. But not only that, this is an active present tense verb participle. Oh my gosh, you did not know that you were going to be in English or Greek class today. Well, you say, what in the world is a participle? I don't remember what a participle is. Well, for those of you who don't remember, participles are those verbs that have the ing ending. This is not just watch, right? This is watching. This is not just watch in the present tense moment, actively watching, but it is watching. Not just watch now, not just watch in the past, not just watch in the future, but watching. In other words, there is a continuousness about it. I'm watching all the time. No matter what else it is that I'm doing, always in my mind, I am watching for Jesus' return. Finally, this word is not just an active present tense verb participle, but it is an active present tense verb participle plural. This is why it's so important that we do this as a community. Think of us, or think of this word as a military unit in enemy territory, right? Somebody is always on watch so that others may sleep, but others are on watch. So that we plan on, as a community, we are on watch, and we know who is watching at this moment and who's watching at that moment and who's watching at that moment. All right? Always watching. Now, say, all right, Mark, I get this. We got this whole cross, these key words in mind. How do we do this? How do we do these? Be ready all the time. In service, realizing that Jesus is the master. Keeping on and not getting bored with it. Doing it together. Keeping watch. How do we go about this? Well, just two suggestions that I have for you quickly this morning. First of all, preparation ahead of time equals ready to serve on time. Preparation ahead of time equals ready to serve on time. Ahead of time action always beats the best of late intentions. Let me say that again so you get it. Ahead of time action always beats the best of late intentions. We have to be so intentional about this that we are willing to plan, that we are willing to work ahead, that we are willing to think ahead. It means oftentimes making a present-day sacrifice so that we will be ready, so that we will be prepared, so that we can serve tomorrow whenever we are called on by our Lord. We don't want to be unprepared. We don't want to be unready. Now, let me give you just a quick example of some of this from a prepared standpoint. Many of you knew that today we're going to have a potluck at the end of this, and I am guessing that some of you thought about it before now. I'm not going to say all of you, because some of you are going, oh, yes, there's a potluck, doggone it. Okay, so for you, this doesn't apply. But for the rest of you who actually thought and prepared for the potluck that we're about to enjoy together, you sacrificed some time yesterday or early this morning to prepare something that we could share together, right? That's what we're talking about here. Preparation ahead of time equals ready to serve on time. Now, why this matters so much is because it involves action on our part. Not just intentions, not just thinking, not just attitude. And let me tell you what I'm saying here. We may say, because it's kind of a Christianese thing to do, we may say, oh, Lord, come today, come quickly. I'm ready for you to come. But stop and think, if he came today, would you be ready? Would your life be ready? Would your family be ready? Would your church be ready? Have we done all that we can do to prepare ourselves and to prepare our neighbors and to prepare our families and to prepare our church for his return? Not just intentions and action, but also a concrete reality that Jesus is coming back again and soon, and we want to be ready for him. That's what this passage is talking about. Coming back to the examples of my daughters canning and freezing, they have not just the intent, not just the action, but a concrete belief in the reality that the food that they make and prepare or can or freeze today will be usable in the future. So they never have to open up their refrigerator and wonder if they have or what they might eat today because of yesterday's intent, because of yesterday's action, based on concrete reality of the belief that what they have done in the past will make a difference when they're ready for it. What about you today? Do you have intent? Do you have action today based on the concrete reality of Christ's return, perhaps even yet today? And then the second thing that I would suggest that you do is that preparation commitment equals ready to serve community. Preparation commitment equals ready to serve community. One more how-to piece of advice here. This scripture, as I've shown you over and over again, is filled with community. So let's not attempt to be prepared ahead of time on our own. Let's do this in community. It's the way that God intends for us to live out our faith together. That's where the joy is found. Again, I come to watch the example of my daughters. You know, they don't just can by themselves. They seem to have joy when they can together. My daughter Jillian doesn't just have fun freezing things by herself. She could just, 7 days in a row, 7 things. She'd have like 50-some things that she'd be ready to go and could just rotate it. But no, the fun of this, the joy of this, is getting together with her girlfriends and doing a swap. The same thing is true for us. I'm convinced that when God calls us to do something, he calls us to do something as a community. Right now, for example, we know that we're looking for a children's director. Is that the leadership job of the leadership team or of the pastor? Or is this something that every single one of us are praying about? Every single one of us are thinking about? Every one of us are saying, boy, this is something that we need to take care of. Or maybe there's another ministry or something that God is calling you to. You say, well, wait a minute. If he's really calling me, he is going to involve other people from my faith community that I can partner with so I don't have to just do it on my own, so that it is sustainable. That's where the joy comes from. So let's prepare ourselves to be ready together. One more thing we'll talk about, and I saved the best for last. Our most amazing promise: those who live their life prepared and ready to serve, here's what we find, will themselves be served by the Master. We don't want to lose out on this. We don't want to forget this. Luke 12:37, the back half. Let me read this again to you. This is Jesus' words, not mine. Here's what he says to you and to me. Truly, I tell you, he being the Master, he will dress himself to serve and will have them, that would be all of us, recline at the table and will come and wait on them. Now this, my friends, is a promise to live for, a promise to live toward, to look forward to. The Master himself will serve us. Can you begin to fathom what this means? That he will serve us, that we will recline at the table. Can you imagine going to Olive Garden and sitting there and Jesus would be the waiter to take your order, that he would wait on us? That is incredible. And none of us would ever imagine it, let alone write it down, but Jesus says it. So 2 quick thoughts before we end. First of all, this is not at all out of character for Jesus. It's just who he is. And the more you know him, the more you'll understand. He is one who serves. His ultimate sacrifice, his ultimate service, I should say, was his sacrifice on the cross for us. And so when we are servants waiting for his return, we are literally taking on his character to serve, just like he himself has already served us and will serve us again. And just one last thought here. You've heard the phrase that the last shall be first and the first shall be last, right? That's actually Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 19 and 20. Well, we could apply this same last first, last principle to our life of serving preparedness. We can serve others now, always preparing ourselves for Jesus coming back at any moment. And if we do this, we will be served later. Kind of like you invest it now and you get it back later. Jesus himself, when he returns, he promises us. He could choose, and you could choose, looking out for number one, self-centeredness, aloneness, living each day out to its maximum, going for all the gusto that I can get. But if so, we risk losing out on the greatest feast of all time served up by the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. The choice is ours now. Which will you choose this day?